So I hope no one is disappointed that this is not Christian Dietz and team. It's me. And I'm going to talk about what's new. I'm going to talk about some things that are new for us in terms of deploying workflows. And I'm going to be talking about work that I did not do. It's very important that the team did this. We had a bunch of developers that are behind all the things that I'm going to show you. I just get to be up here and say the nice things. It's a nice place to be in. Before I really get into details of what's new, I'm going to fight with the computer for a little while. Okay. Before I get into the details of what's new, I want to start with a demo. So I'll do a live demo, which is always fun in front of a bunch of people. How many of you have seen a web portal app before? Good, a few number. So I'm going to show you a web portal app. What this is going to do is demonstrate some of the new views that we have available, and it will also show some of the new features that are available. But it's not necessarily going to be clear what the new bits are. So I'm going to point them out, but I'm going to first show you something cool, and then later we'll go back into Knime and I'll show you how I did that and talk about the details of what's new. So one apology before I actually show you what's coming. Michael had in his slides earlier, he talked about people who have taste, so they had the little art thing next to their name. My name was not on that of the people who have tastes, and there's a little bit of design work that's done here. What you're about to see is what happens when I do design. It looks terrible. You'll understand why we now have people who have taste. So I'm starting this workflow now. What I'm showing you, you can already see what happens when you let me do this. What I'm showing you up at the top is a parallel coordinates plot. The parallel coordinates plot has a number of lines on it. Each of those lines corresponds to a row in my data set. In this particular case, these are chemical compounds that were tested on a variety of different endpoints. The 5 lines are each endpoints. If the chemistry scares you, Michael, pretend that each of these are something that you can purchase. So these are TV sets, different brands, hair dryers, hammers, whatever. And then the columns are price points at prices at various times. So this is January, this is February, March, etc. So you can picture the data however you like. The nice thing about the parallel coordinates plot, I can go in and see the individual things. I can go in and select on the individual axes and filter. So just by selecting here, I can filter to the set of rows that go through that range. I can go up here, filter on 2 things simultaneously. And you can see what I've done now is I picked 3 rows that have a quite similar profile to each other. I'm going to use that, move down a little bit more in my view. Here I have a heat map. This is one of the new views that came out in 3.7. So I have a heat map. This is showing, again, the same 5 columns that we had before for each of the rows. And these have been clustered based on their values in these 5 columns, the data points. This is the cluster tree that corresponds to that. This is another one of the new views, the cluster assigner. And you can see down here the points that I've selected are highlighted. And of course you would expect, because they look very similar in this plot, you would expect them to cluster together, and in fact they do. Down at the bottom I have a tile view, and what the tile view is showing me is only the points that I've selected. So again, if the chemistry scares you, this is a strange TV set, that's a hammer and toilet seat. Whatever. Those are the price points over time. A thing to notice, again, I got to pick fonts, so there are horrible fonts all over the place, not the default ones. I'll show you how I did that. That's also one of the new features, that now you can make your workflows look really ugly. Or if you know what you're doing, you can make them look really good. A thing you may have noticed, the highlighting here corresponds to the highlighting here, and the points that are down here, it's only showing the 3 rows filtered down from 104. It's only showing the 3 that I selected. So these views are all talking to each other, right? So if I go up top and change what I'm looking at, so I can deselect along that column, maybe pick these guys. Sorry, I've selected something somewhere else. I'll just go and select these. If I select a set of points here, it's going to change what's visible in the view below. So now I have the entire cluster selected. You can see I have more points visible in the tile view. So I've told the tile view to only show selected rows. That was basically the point of this whole exercise, is to allow me to go through and pick the television sets, hammers, and toilet seats that I'm interested in order to take them forward and do further analysis. So I'm going to click Next. This isn't going to do anything interesting. It's just going to show me a table with the rows I selected. And now you can imagine me going on and doing some more complicated task. What I wanted to show you was just that view with the pieces linked together and talking to each other, that running in my web browser. Now what I'm going to do is go back to the presentation, talk a little bit about deployment. In the end, we're going to go back into Knime Analytics Platform itself, and I'm going to show you how I built that application that I just showed you, show you how simple that is inside the Analytics Platform and how the deployment actually works. So let's go back to PowerPoint. And it works this time. Okay, that was the demo. So deployment, the way I'm using the term here is I'm talking about making the work that you've done or the output that comes out of it available to other people, available to others. The others may be machines, so making work available to machines. The other is making it available to people. The kinds of people you might imagine making it available for are the three personas that Michael talked about earlier today. So we have business users, those may be customers or stakeholders, upper management, et cetera. Casual users, remember these are people who are using the analytics platform but don't necessarily want to get into the details of how things work. And then data scientists, people with a little bit more expertise. For machines, or for either of these, you might want to make the output of your work available. Machines, you may be updating databases, you may be triggering web services, you may be updating files and writing them to a server somewhere. For people, if you want to make output available, one of the classic things that people do with Knime is generate reports, right? PDF reports or Excel files that people work with. Or again, they may also want to work with the files that you're producing that you deposit somewhere on a server. So that's output available to people. The work itself, the workflow that you do, you can also make that available to people. And for machines, that's talking about web services. So machines call web services and do it in use them in other applications. Or people. So people may be sharing workflows or wrap meta nodes. People may be creating web applications like what I showed you before. Or they may be using guided analytics or guided automation examples. And you'll hear more about guided automation in the last session today of this, the last talk of this session. So let's talk about deploying for machines, because this one's really simple. So we're deploying a web service. We have a workflow. We would like to have that workflow deployed as a web service. So step one is you take a properly prepared workflow, and I will explain what this means. You take a properly prepared workflow, you copy it to the Knime server. And, well, that's it. You're done. This is a really short set of bullet points. I apologize. I had to put that second one in because I learned a long time ago having a one bullet point list is a foul, so there's 2 bullet points. Let me show you what properly prepared means. This is a workflow that reads data in and does some processing. It's simple. Right? This is abstract. These 2 nodes are what I started with, table reader and processing. In order to make this a web service, I added a container input table node and a container output table node. These are 2 things that are new. You used to be able to do this also relatively easily, but it involved a few more nodes. You had to think about JSON. Things were a bit complex. Now with container input table and container output table, it's really, really easy to deploy, to create REST workflows. If you look at the configuration dialog for container input table, one of the reasons it's so nice is there is this big button, set input table as template. So in the previous workflow, you can see I have a table reader that reads sample data in. This is the data that my workflow expects. In container input table, I press that button and it reads the data out of that table and then shows it to me here. Right, so I see kind of the first few rows of that. I also see the column types. So I see column names and column types. Basically what this does is the container input table node takes a look at that and says, okay, when this workflow is called as a web service, it expects 2 columns. One is called compound ID, it's a string, and the next one is called smiles, and it's a smiles. So it now knows that, and it can tell people calling the web service what columns they need to provide and what types they need to be. I can show you what that looks like. For people who've used the web services inside of Knime, you probably know that if you have a workflow on the server, you can right-click on it and select Show API Definition. What this does is it opens up your web browser and takes you to a Swagger UI version of your service. It shows a way to call the service. It allows you to call the service from inside your web browser, but importantly, it shows you what input the service expects. So this is the data from my sample table that container input table node inserted. The reason this is important is if I'm another person, if someone else in the organization wants to know how to call my workflow, call the web service made for my workflow, they don't have to look at the workflow itself. All they have to do is go to the Swagger UI page. They can look at this and they can see, oh, I need to call this with two columns. Those columns are a string and a smiles, and here's examples of what those look like. So this is telling you what you need to do to call the service. Right, so it's really easy to do this from the workflow designer. All you have to do is put those two nodes in, and from someone consuming the service, all they need to do is look at the Swagger UI, and they can see what the types are. They know how to call the service. Okay. Another piece on the services side, this is disconnected, which is why I'm not going to get into too much detail on it, but it's really cool. There's something we've been working on over the past about year now, which is the Knime Managed Scoring Service. This allows you to take Knime workflows, short-running Knime workflows that you've done, and deploy them very easily as web services using a service that we host. So it's not host, but we manage the service. So you basically, your workflow that does a relatively simple task can be made globally available using the managed scoring service. We're still testing this, it's in beta. If you're interested, talk to Jim or Jason who are here. John's not here, but he also has been involved in this work. So this is also a neat one. Again, I'm not going to get into details on this. Okay, deploying for people. So that was the machines. The machines are easy. You add the two nodes and everything's simple. For users, for human beings, we want to talk about deploying things for people who are using the analytics platform. Again, these are the casual users and data scientists, or for everyone else, the business users. For the people who are using the analytics platform, the way you deploy things to them, the way you handle the deployment is just by sharing workflows or by sharing wrapped meta nodes. The workflow, you just copy a workflow to the server, and other people who have access to the server can download it and use it, right? That's pretty easy. They can download their own copy, edit it, and work with it. Wrap meta nodes. If you link a wrap meta node, there's a, well, I can't look up there. If you look at wrap meta node, there's a green, sorry, I lost my pointer. And I'm not going to find it again. Okay. Shit. This is worse. I do live demos and they work, and I can't use PowerPoint. It's perverse. Okay. You can share a wrap meta node. You've seen wrap meta nodes already, right? I take a bunch of Knime nodes and I put them together, wrap them up, and now they're in this encapsulated piece of functionality. In this case, this one has a single input and no outputs. I can copy this to the server, and then other people can copy it into their workflows. They can copy it in the workflows in such a way that it's actually linked back to the server. So you may be able to see in the back, there's a green arrow on this node, on this wrap meta node. That green arrow indicates that it's connected to some other place, so it's a linked node. What that means is that when I open this workflow, I'm going to get a prompt in Knime, and it's going to say, for this particular workflow, there are 2 meta node links, and it asks me if I want to check for updates. So I open the workflow, it says there are 2 links. I can say, yes, I want to check for updates, and it will then go and grab the most recent version of that meta node from the server and bring it back to my analytics platform. So it makes it easy to share these little encapsulated bits of functionality, use them in your workflows, and update them. Keep them automatically updated from the server. This is much more straightforward than having 15 nodes that you copy from one workflow to the next and that constantly get out of date. Okay, so we talked about sharing workflows with people. Those are for casual users or for, casual data scientists or for casual users or data scientists. You can also create web applications, as we saw. So that's using the web portal, again, a server feature. The way you do that is you copy a workflow to the server. It's the same as creating a REST service, basically. The difference here is that the wrapped meta nodes in your workflow become web pages. So this is the workflow that I demonstrated at the very beginning. Right? There were 2 pages. There was the one for this wrapped meta node that has the activity clustering, and the other that views the selections. So this workflow copied to the server gives me the application that we saw before. If we look inside these nodes, so I drill into the wrap meta node by control clicking or by the context menu, this particular one has a number of new features in it. So there's the tile view. This was that view that we saw down at the bottom that has the had the pictures and the values underneath it. This is basically, you can think of it as a table view, but instead of having the data presented this way, it's presented vertically, and pictures show up really nicely. So it's a really good thing for like catalogs, or in this case for showing chemical compounds to people with associated data. The other thing that's new is this wrapped meta node contains another wrapped meta node, and you didn't used to be able to do this. It used to be that if you had a wrapped meta node inside of a wrapped meta node and you put it to the web portal, it just wouldn't work. So the fact that you can nest these things now is new. If we look inside that one, this has some clustering. This is not new. It's been in Knime for a long time. But this hierarchical cluster assigner that we saw, that's another one of the new pieces of functionality. We'll look at all this again when I pop the thing back up and you can see what they do. There's a bit more work, and then the heat map was the other new functionality in there. So these are 2 of the other new views that came out in the last Knime release. Going back into the original wrap meta node, there's this CSS editor. This is the thing that allows you to put nice styling on your view. So if you don't like the default styling, you can change it. Sorry, I thought I had a view of that. I'll show you what that looks like inside of Knime itself. If you don't like what's there, you can change it and do things like provide horrible fonts like I did, or change colors, or make the whole thing look good, or make it match the rest of the identity for what people normally see on your websites inside your company. Let me show you some of that stuff inside of Knime. I still have a little bit more time. This is my workflow. These wrap meta nodes, the ones that have views attached to them, if I just execute them and open the views, it will open up a browser inside of Knime itself. So again, this is what we saw before, right? It's exactly the same thing except for running inside of Chrome. It's a window that was launched by Knime. We have all of the interactivity we had before. This is the nice parallel coordinates plot. This has been in Knime for a while, but I think it's fantastically useful, so I show it as often as I possibly can. Right? This is a really cool thing. The heat map is also one of the new things we mentioned. This has all of it can also participate in selection, like the other nodes. So I can go in and have the heat map show me only selected rows. So now these are the rows in the heat map corresponding to the points I just selected in the dendrogram. The dendrogram has a cutoff, so you can actually use this to pick clusters. If you don't know how many clusters you want to pick from your data set, you can move the bar along, and you can see that the cluster is changing. So in this case, I've gone down. There's only 4 clusters in the data now. I can move down a little bit further. If I'm happier here, now I have 15. It's giving you the concrete threshold value as well as the number of clusters that it finds. The output of this node contains an assignment of each row to the clusters. So if you're concerned about the clustering, this is a really nice way to kind of go into your hierarchical clustering and take a look at the data that way. And then the tile view at the bottom we already showed. We already talked about this. Again, you have an optional image that you can include, or if there's images in your data, it will show it to you. There's a row. You can specify a row that is the title of each of these tiles, and then it just shows the values from the table. So this could just as easily be a table view. This is just a nicer way of presenting the data sometimes. And I already mentioned from the CSS editor, I changed the color and font here. So instead of being a normal boring font, it's something kind of horrible. And same thing down here. The way I did that is inside the CSS editor. So this is just a syntax highlighting editor. that allows you to specify the CSS that's being used. It's pretty complete. It's pretty nice because it does auto-completion, so if you don't remember all the class names, you can still use it, except for I can't. Okay. So you can get it to show all of the class names, including the documentation available. So it's pretty easy to figure out what the classes you want to modify are. This spits out CSS that you can then provide to the other nodes and do the styling. The last thing I want to show, because I'm running out of time, the last thing I want to show is there was a visual layout attached to all of this. Remember when we looked at the view, well, let's just go look at the view instead of remembering. We will look at the view. We look at the view, there's the parallel coordinates plot, and then these two things together, and then down at the bottom, the tile view. And I need to tell Knime to do that, right, to get that layout. And it was important for me for the analysis that they were in that order. It wouldn't have made any sense to have the tile view at the top. The way I did that is here, inside the rep meta node. There's a dialog that allows you to change the layout. And this is one of the things that changed in the last release. For people who've been doing this for a while, the way you originally did this was by editing this. Yeah, that was fun. And then for a while, you had this. And this is pretty good. It was a huge improvement over this. But now we've gotten to something that's much nicer. Now you can actually see what the things are and about how much space they're going to take up on the page and what their relative layout is to each other. So here you can go in and you can add additional columns and you can add additional rows. It makes it really easy to lay out your views. So that is the visual layout editor, which is one of the big new features from an end user perspective in 3.7. Okay, that's it for my demoing bits. Just a reminder of what it is we talked about. From my perspective, deployment is this making your work or the output available to each other. We do this with Knime Server. We go to machines. That was REST services, making REST services available, or for people of various different kinds. That can either be the services, or it can be reports, or it can be these interactive workflows that we did, the guided analytics applications. That's it. I think we have time for some questions. I hope I have inspired you to do more with these things. If you have questions at the demo stations, people have these workflows and we can show you that, and we can also, most of us are very happy to get into the detail of how to put these things together because we think they're pretty cool. Thanks.